My name is David. I am 17 years old and I live in a small town in Alabama, USA. My family is not rich, but my mother always gives us everything we need. She works 2 jobs just to make sure I and my little sister, Emily, can go to school and have good food on the table. My mother always tells me, David, one day you will go far, but you must learn to speak English well. I know we live in America and everyone around me speaks English, but the truth is I was always afraid of speaking. I could understand a little, I could write basic sentences, but when someone talked to me, I stayed silent. I felt small. One night I was sitting at the dinner table. My mother looked tired. I could see it in her eyes. I asked her, "Mom, are you okay?" She smiled and said, "I'm just a little tired, honey, but I want you to promise me something. Promise me you will learn English and speak with confidence. It will change your life." I looked at her and said, "I promise, Mom, I will do it." The next morning, I made a plan. I took a notebook and wrote my goal on the first page. I will learn to speak English with confidence. I also made a schedule. Every morning, I would listen to a short English conversation. After school, I would practice speaking in front of the mirror. Before sleeping, I would write a few sentences in English about my day. At school, I had a friend named Jacob. He was very good at English. I told him about my promise to my mother. He said, "David, that's a great goal. I will help you." Every day during lunch break, we would talk in English. I would make many mistakes, but Jacob always smiled and said, "Keep going, you're improving." One day during English class, our teacher asked everyone to introduce themselves. I felt my heart beating fast. When my turn came, I stood up. I took a deep breath and said, "Hello. My name is David. I live in Alabama. I want to learn English to help my family." Everyone clapped. I felt happy. It was my first time speaking English in front of the whole class. From that day, I started practicing more. I watched English cartoons with subtitles. I repeated simple dialogues. I learned 5 new words every day and use them in sentences. I would say things like, "This is my pencil," or "I am eating lunch," or "I go to school at 8 o'clock. At home, I practiced with my little sister, Emily. I would say, "Hello, Emily, how are you?" She would laugh and say, "I am fine, thank you, and you?" We made it a game and we both started learning together. One weekend, my mother was sitting on the couch. I sat next to her and said, in English, "Mom, today I learned 10 new words and spoke English with my teacher." She smiled and hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, David. Keep going." That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Today was a good day. I spoke English. I made mistakes, but I tried." My mother smiled at me. I knew this was just the beginning, but I had promised my mother and I was ready to keep that promise. I would not stop. I would not give up. This was the first chapter of my journey and I was ready to write the next one with more confidence. Every morning before school, I played an English podcast on my phone. It was a story about a boy who learned English in a village just like mine. That story gave me courage. I realized that I was not alone. Many others were on the same path. At school, our English teacher, Miss Learan, noticed my improvement. She said, "David, your pronunciation is better than last month. What are you doing?" I smiled and said, "I practice every day." She nodded with a proud look and said, "Keep it up." One day, Jacob came to me with an idea. He said, "David, let's record our conversations and listen to them later. We can find our mistakes." I loved the idea. After lunch, we sat in the empty classroom and talked about our day in English. We said things like, "I had cereal for breakfast," and "I came to school by bus." Later, we listened to the recording and laughed at our silly mistakes, but it helped a lot. That weekend, I went to the grocery store with my mom. She asked me to speak to the cashier. I was nervous, but I said, "Hello, can I get a bag, please?" The cashier smiled and said, "Of course. Here you go." I said thank you and walked out feeling like a hero. At home, I created flashcards. I wrote English words on one side and meanings on the other. I reviewed them every night. I even made a chart on my wall with my weekly goals, like learn 20 new words or speak English with 3 people. One evening, my mother sat beside me and said, "I am happy to see you trying so hard. You keep your promise like a true man." I smiled and said, "I will speak perfect English one day." Mom, I promise again. She looked at me and said, I know you will. I believe in you. At school, our teacher announced an English storytelling competition. My heart jumped. Jacob pushed me and said, Go for it, David, you can do this. I went home and thought, what should I write? I remembered the story of that farmer and the stars that Miss Clara once told us. I decided to write a similar story. I wrote a tale about a boy who wanted to fly and how to learn it English to become a pilot. I practiced the story in front of Emily. She said, David, your story is cool. You should add some fun lines like boom, I am flying. I laughed and added her idea. The day of the competition arrived. I stood in front of my class. I took a deep breath and began. My name is David and this is my story. Everyone listened. I made small mistakes, but I kept going. At the end, they clapped loud and cheered. My teacher came to me and said, Well done, David, you made us proud. That night I wrote in my notebook, Today I felt brave. I told a story in English and people listened. My promise to my mother was becoming real. I was no longer just learning English, I was living it. And the journey had just begun. Weeks passed and my English was getting better. I now spoke with my teachers with more confidence. I even started answering questions in class. When I made mistakes, I smiled and tried again. My fear was slowly turning into courage. Jacob and I made a new rule. We would speak only English from morning to evening. It was hard at first, but after a few days we were speaking without thinking. We talked about homework, food, weather, dreams, and funny things from our day. One day Jacob said, David, let us help more students like us, the ones who are afraid to speak. I loved the idea. We started a small English club in school. Every Friday after class, we met with 4 other students. We talked about simple topics like my weekend or my favorite food. Everyone took turns speaking. We clapped and encouraged each other. My teacher, Miss Clara, saw our group. She said, David, this is amazing. You are not just learning, you are leading. I smiled shyly and said, Thank you, ma'am. At home, my mother noticed my improvement. She said, I heard you talking in English with Emily in the kitchen. You sound so natural. I hugged her and said, I am keeping my promise, Mom. I am doing my best. One Sunday, I joined an online group where people from different countries practiced English together. I met a boy from India, a girl from Brazil, and a man from Egypt. We all had different accents, but we all had the same goal: to speak English better. We shared our stories and practiced together. Every night I wrote in my notebook. I wrote things like, today I spoke with 3 new people, or I learned 5 new words, or I helped someone in our club speak with confidence. My notebook was full of small victories. Then one day our school announced a video contest. The topic was my biggest dream. Jacob said, You have to do this, David. I knew what my dream was. I wanted to become a teacher and help students learn English with love and patience. I wrote a short script and practiced speaking in front of the camera again and again. Emily helped me record. She made me laugh between takes, but I finished the video and submitted it. 2 weeks later, the results were announced. I did not win the first prize, but my video was selected as most inspirational. I was called on stage to speak. I said, My name is David and I want to be a teacher one day. I will teach students who are afraid of English like I was. I will tell them to believe in themselves like my mother believed in me. Everyone clapped. I looked at my mother in the crowd. She had tears in her eyes. That night I wrote in my notebook, Today I felt like I found my purpose. I will learn, I will teach, I will keep my promise. My journey was not finished, it had just found a new direction. Graduation day finally arrived. I wore my black gown and cap. I looked in the mirror and said to myself, You did it, David. My mother helped me fix my collar and said, You look handsome, my son. I smiled and said, And ready to speak English too. On the stage, the principal called my name. I walked up, took my diploma and looked at the audience. I saw my mother clapping with tears in her eyes. I waved at her and whispered, Thank you, Mom. After the ceremony, my teacher, Miss Clara, walked over. She said, I heard you got admission into community college. With a focus on English teaching, I nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am, I want to help more students like me." Summer began and I got a part-time job at a small bookstore. The owner, R. Harris, was kind and friendly. One day he asked me to help a tourist who didn't speak much English. I said, "Of course I can help." I sat with the lady and helped her find the book she needed. We used simple words and smiles. Later, Mr. Harris said, "David, you have a gift. You make people feel safe and welcome." I said, "Thank you, sir. I learned from my mother and from trying every day." One evening, I was invited to give a short talk at my school. For the new students, I stood at the podium and said, "When I was 17, I could not speak English well. I was scared, shy, and silent. But I made a promise to my mother, and that promise changed my life." The students listened with wide eyes. I shared my small tricks, my notebook, my mirror practice, my club, my recordings. I told them, "Don't wait to be perfect. Start today. Make mistakes. Speak anyway. That's how you grow." After the talk, a book came to me and said, "I was afraid too, but your story gave me hope." I said, "Good. Keep trying and remember your reason." Years passed and I became a teacher. I stood in front of my class full of students with dreams in their hearts. I saw fear in their eyes, just like I once had, and I smiled. Every day I told them stories, not just grammar or vocabulary, but real stories of struggle and strength. I said, English is not just a language, it's a door. Open it, and you will discover a new world. One afternoon, after class, I got a call from my mother. She said, "David, I met your old teacher, Miss Clara, today." She said, "You are doing wonderful work." I smiled and said, "That's because of you, Mom. You made me promise and I kept it." That night I sat by the window with my notebook. I opened the last page and wrote, "I promised I would learn English, and I did. Now I teach it." I made my mother proud, and I made myself proud too. And with that, the story of a shy boy from Alabama who once feared words came to an end. But his voice now lives in classrooms, dreams, and every student who dares to speak.